John Dickman was born in Newcastle on 17th May 1864. His mother, Zelina Royer Dickman, died while giving birth to a fourth child. Soon afterwards, the three surviving children were sent to live with relatives. After leaving school, Dickman went to work for his father, who ran a successful farming and butchery business in Great Lumley, County Durham. Dickman disliked this work and eventually found employment as a clerk with a company called Mason and Barry in Wallsend. Later, he worked as a clerk with the ship owners Dixon, Robson and Company. In January 1892, Dickman married a young schoolteacher called Annie Bainbridge. After several years of financial stability, Dickman lost his job in 1901 with Dixon's, and he was out of work for several months before finding employment as secretary with a colliery in Morpeth. In 1906, Dickman arranged for the Morpeth Colliery Company to be sold to Moore, Brown and Fletcher. Although the transaction put him out of a job, Dickman received a commission of over £500, which was equivalent of several years' wages. Soon afterwards, a distant relative left him £200 in her will. He decided to use this money to become a professional gambler. He claims this venture was a success, but there is evidence that by 1909 he was experiencing money problems and owed several £100s to moneylenders. The average train journey from Newcastle to Alnmouth takes around 46 minutes. When the 10:27 train from Newcastle reached Alnmouth on Friday, March 18, 1910, a shocking discovery was made. Thomas Charlton, the station's foreman porter, noticed an empty compartment with a window open. As he opened the door to close the window, he spotted what appeared to be bloodstains on the floor of the third-class compartment. It quickly became clear that the blood was coming from a body hidden as far as possible beneath the seat. The victim had sustained several severe and fatal head wounds. A name tag inside the victim's hat identified him as J.I. Nisbet, 180 Heaton Road, Heaton. Other items found in the compartment included 2 newspapers, a return ticket from Newcastle to Widrington, broken glasses, and 4 bullets of 2 different calibers. John Nisbet was born in Newcastle in 1864. After leaving school, he became a clerk with a colliery company. Nisbet married, and in 1893 his wife gave birth to a girl named Cicely. 4 years later, a second child, Lily, was born. Nisbet was appointed cashier of Stobbswood Colliery. One of his jobs was to collect the wages of the colliery workers from a bank in Newcastle. It is hard to imagine the dreadful shock that John Nisbet's wife, Cicely, must have received later that day when the police arrived at their home on Heaton Road. It soon became apparent that Nisbet had been carrying out a regular fortnightly task for his employers, the colliery owners Rain and Byrne. This involved cashing a cheque at Lloyd's Bank, then taking the money to Stobbswood Colliery, close to Widrington. On the 18th of March, this was a sum of £370, 9 shillings and 6 pence, which would be equal to approximately £45,000. The cash was carried in a lockable leather bag and had been destined for payment of the workers' wages. There was no evidence of what had happened to this cash, most, if not all, of which has never been recovered. The basic details of the crime were soon circulated, along with an appeal asking for any further information that individuals might be able to provide. 2 colliery clerks employed in a similar position to Nisbet, though working for the Netherton Coal Company, came forward to say that they had also been on the 10:27 train that day. Percival Harding Hall stated that he had carried out the same task as Nisbet for several years and through travelling on the same train each fortnight, knew him well by sight. Hall, together with his travelling companion John William Spink, had settled into a compartment near the front of the train. Hall stated that while still at Newcastle Central Station, he looked out of the window and saw John Nisbet in the company of a man he did not know. He put forward a reasonably detailed description of this individual and stated that he thought he would recognize him again. Just after 10:30, the train pulled into Heaton Station, where it paused briefly. In these few minutes, Nisbet's wife Cicely spoke to her husband through the open window of his compartment. It is essential to recall that compartment trains on this line did not have corridors and were therefore quite isolated, unless someone joined from a station platform. At Stannington, Hall and Spink left the train, but both men remembered seeing Nisbet in the company of a man they did not know in the next carriage and nodding to him in acknowledgement. It could be assumed that, as Nisbet did not alight from the train at his scheduled stop of Widrington, his murder had taken place by then. The police were fortunate in that another witness, John Grant, a platelayer, came forward to say that at Morpeth, before climbing into a smoking compartment of the second carriage, he walked past the first compartment, which was empty. As this was the location of Nisbet and his companion, which had been attested to by Hall and Spink, it led to the view that at this point Nisbet was already dead, and his body hidden beneath the seat. The police concluded that Nisbet had met his end between Stannington, 11:06, and Morpeth, 11:12. The track between these two stations was searched, as there was an initial hypothesis that the killer must have left the train in this area. This was given some credence, as Grant said that he had not seen anyone leave the first compartment. A rather general, though useful, description of John Nisbet and the person who had been seen with him at Newcastle Central Station was circulated. While the motive seemed clear, there was initially no solid information about potential suspects. Cicely Nisbet, the widow, provided her account of visiting Heaton Station on the morning of March 18th to see her husband as he embarked on one of his regular train journeys carrying the miner's wages. She noted her surprise at finding him in a carriage near the engine instead of his usual spot toward the rear of the train. "My husband was laughing and seemed to be in great spirits. I only had time to tell him, 'You won't be later than 6 o'clock tonight, mind. Auntie is coming,'" she recounted. Mrs. Nisbet mentioned that her husband responded affirmatively, but although she saw another man in the compartment, she couldn't see him. The identity of this man remained unknown until a call was received on the morning of Sunday, March the 20th, from Wilson Heppel, an artist with a studio on Gallowgate. Heppel informed the police that he had been on the train in question and had seen two men together on the platform at Newcastle Central. Based on his description, he was confident that one of the men was John Nisbet, while he recognized the other as John Alexander Dickman, a long-time acquaintance. On the Monday afternoon of 21st March, Inspector Andrew Tate arrived at 1 Lily Avenue in Jesmond to ask Dickman in for questioning at Gosforth Police Station. Calmly and Dickman agreed that he had taken the train in question with a proposed destination of Stannington. He intended to visit the Dovecote Colliery and nearby Lansdale Drift to discuss the possibility of new workings there. Dickman said that he had occupied a smoking compartment towards the rear of the train. Being occupied in reading the Manchester Sporting Chronicle about the upcoming Grand National, Dickman said that he remembered people leaving and entering the compartment at various stops, but could not recall any particular details of individuals. His concentration upon the racing information in the newspaper was such that he accidentally went past his stop of Stannington and therefore needed to alight at Morpeth, where he paid 2.5 pence excess fare. Dickman said that he had known John Nisbet for several years and had seen him from afar in the ticket hall of the station, but they had not met or spoken. After leaving Morpeth, Dickman said that he had proposed walking along the road to the two collieries near Stannington, but was taken ill and had to lie down by the edge of a field for a short time. After recovering to some degree, Dickman walked back towards the station and eventually caught the 1:40 slow train to Newcastle. As he had missed the express train, Dickman had spent some time in Morpeth itself, where he bumped into an acquaintance, Edwin Elliot, together with another man called William Sanderson. This meeting was confirmed by both men, who recalled a conversation about the Grand National and possible winners. Dickman was found to have a sum of £17 9s and 11 pence, the majority of which was in a Lambton's bank bag. Evidence of a loan of £20 from a local moneylender in October 1909 was also discovered. Upon being cautioned and arrested for murder, Dickman replied, It is absurd for me to deny the charge, because it is absurd to make it. A thorough search of the house, which involved dismantling the piano and digging up the garden, then took place. Items removed included 2 pawn tickets, personal letters, and bank books, as well as a pair of suede gloves and trousers. The light-coloured Burberry raincoat that Dickman had been wearing at the time of his arrest was also taken. There is no doubt that the organisation and conduct of the ensuing identity parade would fail to meet more modern standards of objectivity and rigour. Hall and Spink were asked to inspect a line of 9 men to see if they could pick out the individual they had seen in the company of John Nisbet. Hall was unable to do so, and Spink was equivocal and somewhat uncertain in choosing Dickman despite some possible prompting from one of the officers present. On Wednesday, 23rd March, was the funeral of John Innes Nisbet. Immense crowds gathered in the vicinity of the house and stretched from Heaton Road along Armstrong Bridge to Jesmond Road. The gates of Jesmond Old Cemetery were only open to enable the funeral procession to pass inside. An open landau carried a magnificent collection of most beautiful floral tributes of respect and was followed by 6 carriages containing relatives, friends, and business associates. The service was led and conducted by Reverend R. Trotter, the vicar of St. Gabriel's Church. It is perhaps to be expected that large crowds would also gather when John Dickman was being charged. Before the beginning of the trial itself on the 4th of July, another discovery was made. A routine inspection of the recently closed Isabella mine shaft, part of the Hepscott Colliery near Morpeth, was undertaken on Thursday, 9th June. Peter Spooner, the mine supervisor, had almost completed his monthly survey when he noticed something lying half buried in the mud. Several coins, together with a sturdy leather bag which had been cut open, lay at the bottom of the mine shaft. A small amount of money, as well as wage slips for the Stobbswood Colliery, lay at the bottom of the bag. The trial itself began with the sharing of background information and the evidence of witnesses who would attest to seeing Dickman in the company of John Nisbet on the day in question. The individuals we have already encountered were summoned to give evidence, though this time they were augmented by Cicely Nisbet, who had some new information to share. At an earlier magistrates' court session on 21st April, Mrs. Nisbet had been taken unwell and had fainted. She now revealed the cause of this collapse. She said that she had recognized the profile of the unknown person she had briefly seen in the railway compartment at Heaton Station as being the accused, John Alexander Dickman. In the trial at the Moot Hall before Lord Coleridge, Mrs. Nisbet was now certain in her conclusion that Dickman was the man she had seen at Heaton Station in her husband's company. Although the reliability of this observation may be doubted, its power and impact on the jury must have been considerable. The prosecution began by examining the lifestyle and financial situation of John Dickman. How the 2 men's lives coincided is illustrated by the fact that John Dickman and his wife lived in several properties across Heaton in the 1890s, with their daughter Catherine being born at 45 7th Avenue and their son in 1897 at 97 Falmouth Road. There was substantial evidence, however, that by 1910 the financial situation of the Dickman household had become precarious. The prosecution was determined to provide evidence that this would demonstrate a sufficient motive. A list of debts to moneylenders and pawned items, including field glasses, presumably for use at race meetings, was presented to the court. Clerks and members of staff from several banks, including Lloyd's and the National Provincial, gave evidence that the accounts held both by Mr. Dickman and his wife had declined in the last 6 months to being virtually empty. Other circumstantial and contested evidence afforded by the prosecution included the inspection of all the clothes that Dickman owned. Newcastle College of Medicine's Professor Robert Bolam, who had been educated at Ashfield Villa, the School of Science and Art on Heaton Road, was asked to examine the evidence. Professor Bolam gave his findings regarding possible bloodstains on a number of items of clothing, including suede gloves, the front pocket of a pair of trousers, and the fawn-coloured Burberry overcoat. The front of this last item appeared to have been subjected to vigorous cleaning using paraffin. There was some debate concerning what these marks were and how Kichao Faz when they had been made. While it was significantly easier to obtain and own a gun in 1910 than it is today, it was still considered an unusual possession. Henrietta Hyman, who managed a newsagent's in the Groat Market, testified that Dickman had used her shop as a postal address. However, until January 1910, Ms. Hyman believed John Dickman was named Fred Black. In October 1910, Mr. Black informed her that he was expecting a firearm to be delivered. Shortly after, 2 parcels arrived, accompanied by a postcard from Bell Brothers of Glasgow requesting the return of a revolver that had been sent by mistake. The sole defense witness was John Alexander Dickman himself. He gave a forthright, if at times vague, description of his actions on the day of the murder. Dickman did accept that he had made the same journey 2 weeks previously and emphasized that his aim in doing so was to visit an acquaintance, Mr. Hogg, at Stannington, regarding the sinking of new shafts at the Dovecote Colliery. Dickman stated that he did not make appointments in advance when embarking on visits to the Northumberland coalfield, though he said he always received a positive welcome. It is fair to say that Dickman's overall impression was somewhat unconvincing and may have seemed evasive. The circumstantial nature of much of the evidence may have been the most persuasive argument that the case had not been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. At 12:55 p.m. on Wednesday, the 16th of July, the jury retired to consider their verdict. They returned just after 3:30 p.m. to give their judgment, guilty of willful murder. In response, John Dickman stated clearly and loudly, "I can only repeat that I am entirely innocent of this cruel deed. I declare to all men that I am innocent." Lord Coleridge, in passing sentence of death, intoned, "In your hungry lust for gold, you had no pity upon the victim whom you slew, and it is only just that the nemesis of the law should overtake the author of the crime." It has also been claimed that the judge who tried Dickman, the 3 appeal court judges who heard and rejected his appeal, and the Home Secretary, Winston Churchill, who refused to commute Dickman's death sentence, were all friends of Charles Luard and bent on avenging his and his wife's deaths. Caroline Luard responded to an advertisement placed by Dickman in the Times, seeking financial assistance by sending him a check. Dickman later forged this check, presumably altering the amount, and when Caroline discovered this, she contacted him and arranged to meet without her husband's knowledge. Charles Luard had planned to walk toward a summer house on their neighbour's property before parting ways with his wife. He intended to stop by his local golf club to pick up his clubs in preparation for a holiday they were planning. Meanwhile, she was enjoying the fresh air before returning home to meet a friend for tea. After retrieving his clubs, Major General Luard returned home to find his wife's guest had arrived, but there was no sign of her. Worried, he began retracing their steps. As he approached the summer house, known as the Casa, his dog alerted him. On the veranda of the seldom-used house, he discovered her body. Initially, he thought she had fainted, but soon noticed the blood surrounding her. She had been shot twice in the head, with a 3rd shot missing, and was found near her body. 1 glove had been pulled off, and rings from one of her hands were missing. A pocket from her dress had been torn away, and her purse was gone. In a state of hysteria, he rushed to a nearby house to raise the alarm. Since the killer was never apprehended, and for reasons unknown, Home Secretary Winston Churchill ordered the execution of a suspect in response to the murder of his friend's wife. Winston Churchill considered the process sufficiently insecure to refer the matter to the appeal court, which sat on Friday, 22nd July. The appeal judges did spend some time examining the criticisms of the first trial, but afforded particular weight to the testimony of Heppel as being the most certain and reliable witness. The earlier verdict and sentence were confirmed, meaning that Dickman's only hope lay with an appeal to the Home Secretary to commute the sentence to life imprisonment. On Wednesday, 27th July, a lengthy document confessing to the crime and signed C.A. Mildening was received at Newcastle jail. It was considered to be an attempt to confuse the issue, to undermine the notion and phenomenon of capital punishment itself, rather than stemming from an actual agent of the crime. On the same day, Dickman wrote his last letter to his wife, stating that, "I am still hoping and trusting that something or other will be disclosed which will prove my innocence." The Home Secretary saw no reason to commute the sentence and upheld the decisions of the initial judge and jury. The execution date was set for Tuesday, the 9th of August, 1910. Early that morning, a crowd numbering between 1,000 and 2,000 people gathered outside Newcastle jail on Carlisle Square. The public interest in the case is demonstrated by the actions of one journalist who had clambered onto the roof of a nearby building, refusing to leave. To block his view of the prison yard, a large canvas sheet was erected. The Newcastle Evening Chronicle reported that when asked by the chaplain to confess, Dickman was silent, but that he marched to his execution as erect as a soldier, never flinching. As an executed felon, Dickman was buried in the grounds of the jail. When the prison was demolished in 1925, a decision had to be made concerning what should happen to the bodies of the condemned men there. It was felt appropriate to disinter the cadavers and rebury them in an unmarked space in All Saints Cemetery on Jesmond Road, opposite Jesmond Old Cemetery, where Nisbet had been interred 15 years earlier.